Welcome back. I'm going to go through everything you need to know about the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come. This is the video of the final ghost, so do check out the others in the playlist. As always, I'm going to talk through what to learn, what it means, and what to say about it. Let's start with the ghost itself. I'm going to whiz through 2 quotations that encapsulate everything you need to know about the ghost. Each of them you can put on a flashcard if you haven't already, and each of them can be exploded as part of practice. I've put the quotations used in the description throughout this whole video if you want to practice this afterwards or later. Number 1 is about the way the narrator describes the ghost moving. Slowly, gravely, silently. Now, this ghost never says a word, so the description of how it moves becomes important. Note first that this is a list. Dickens loves lists because they build up detail, each word adding a different aspect. This particular list is a tricolon, a 3-parted list, and Dickens' intention here is to develop a rich atmosphere and reflect the growing fear in the character of Scrooge. One of the things we often observe about a tricolon is that they tend to be either ascending, growing in importance or intensity, or descending, decreasing in importance or intensity. I'm going to say that the intention here is to create an increasing sense of fear. So that's an ascending tricolon, and let's take them one by one. Slowly conveys a deliberate movement towards Scrooge and reflects that common theme of time in the novella. He became a miserly swine of a character slowly, but there is still time to change. That measured movement of the ghost also reflects Scrooge's slow journey of self-awareness, and grammatically, the structure of individual adverbs slows the narrative, slows the sentence. The pauses are created by the commas, and this builds to a critical moment for the character. The ghost is slow, but it's also unavoidable. Gravely means serious, reinforcing the somber and dark tone of the moment. It shows the reader that this coming moment will be serious and have consequences. And the word is linked to the word grave. This is a moment of mortal reckoning, and this will be Scrooge's final chance of redemption. In retrospect, having read the rest of the novella, we can see that it also foreshadows what the ghost will point towards, Scrooge's own grave. But at this point in the narrative, the character is not fully redeemed because he lacks that self-awareness. Silently is the most intense word here, and it works by removing one of the senses, amplifying the sense of emptiness in the character and the grave. The silence is deathly and shows that the external influence is about to end. No one else will tell Scrooge what he has to do. The character has to make up his own mind. The second quotation is about the symbolism of the ghost's appearance. He is described as shrouded in a deep black garment. Both the previous ghosts had light associated with them, from the bright jet of truth in The Ghost of Christmas Past and the warmth and light of the glowing torch that the Ghost of Christmas Present carried. So some of the meaning of this ghost, the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come, comes from the contrast with the other ghosts. Let's deal with a few specifics about the quotation. Shrouded means something is hidden. This ghost is hidden. It has no face or no discernible face, no eyes, no idea is given about what they're feeling. So the ghost is concealing himself from Scrooge, forcing him to think for himself. But the word shroud is also imbued with ideas of burial through the idea of a burial shroud, a cloth that would be used to wrap a body on burial, the most famous being the Turin shroud, and this reminds the reader that this ghost is about death, and more specifically, about the judgment that comes after death. The colour of the shroud is interesting symbolically. Black is the colour of mourning, of remembering death, in this case, Scrooge's future death, and the starkness of the colour reflects the serious and solemn nature of the ghost, which is amplified by the somewhat unnecessary adjective deep. The colour is either black or it isn't, so the idea of deep becomes more emotional, more symbolic of the seriousness of whether Scrooge will actually save his soul or not. The darkness is the unknown, the undecided, and the possible despair that the character would feel. So, we've established the ghost is a symbol of judgment, of death, of something to be feared. But what does it show Scrooge? I'm going to break this into 3 sections. So first up are the scenes of death and morality. For this, I'm going to look at the description of the family who owed Scrooge money. And when they find out Scrooge is dead, the narrator describes how it was a happier house for this man's death. Dickens is using dramatic irony here and throughout the rest of this stave. The reader knows that the grave belongs to Scrooge and all the scenes are related to his death, but Scrooge remains in the dark on this. So Dickens talks about this man's death instead of naming this man. This is the shameful effect of Scrooge's extreme capitalism and greed. The family's reaction illustrates the extent of Scrooge's selfishness and the harm he's caused to others, and it's quite abhorrent to be happy about somebody's death. Interestingly, though, the reader is probably on side with this. We see that family's desperation and realise that Scrooge's death means they're no longer under the oppressive weight of his demands, giving them a sense of freedom and hope. Dickens also links the idea of crime and poverty and suggests that sometimes they can be seen as the overall effect of greed through the visions supplied by this ghost. If people are desperately poor, they are willing to behave in ways that they wouldn't otherwise. This really echoes the ignorance and want characters from the previous stave. Here we're presented with a new area of London around Joe's shop, which is described as the whole quarter, reeked with crime, with filth and misery. Let's deal with reeked first. This conveys a sense of a foul odour, a sense of decay and deterioration, which is initially physically but symbolically represents a moral deterioration and a moral decay. This metaphorical stink is repulsive and it pushes people away, meaning the wealthier people probably do not get to see what life is really like for these people. In reality, the poor are being ignored, and this is hidden, just like ignorance and want are hidden, in the skirts of the Ghost of Christmas Present. If you wanted to, you could make a contrast between this place and the happier places that Dickens shows, and in particular the wealthier, warmer, happier, familial places. The sense of smell around Old Joe's shop shows that there is something wrong here, and the wealthier in society will not care until that stench begins to affect them. But what is causing this offensive stench? Again, Dickens gives us an ascending tricolon for the qualities, in this case abstract nouns, and they're building a sequence of growing severity. So, initially, crime flourishes because of desperation. The area has filth because it's not looked after, and this ends in misery, the most personal and affecting of the abstract nouns. Now it becomes an internalized, emotive quality, showing the reader the suffering of those that live there, those that have to grow up there. Dickens is drawing a link between the poverty that these people endure and the crime that is present in these communities and the misery that this causes. All of this is placed in front of the reader, posing questions of them. Are you happy to let it continue? Do you feel a moral imperative to address these issues? People like Scrooge created the conditions for this to flourish. Will you, dear reader, allow this to go on? Let's turn our attention to some graves. Here is a simple quotation to describe Tiny Tim's. The single word, green. If you want the full version, it would have done you good to see how green a place it is. This line is spoken by Bob Cratchit to his wife as he reflects on Tiny Tim's final resting place. Like the green of the holly and the colour of the Ghost of Christmas Present's robe, the symbolism here is of life. There's irony here, since Tiny Tim has died, at least in this branch of the timeline, but he represents what Scrooge's life should have been and lacked, loving and caring for others, and in return being loved by family and friends. Bob Cratchit goes on to say, "I promised him that I would walk there on a Sunday. This is a moment that crystallises the pathos Dickens wishes to deliver. It's poignant because it's clear that Bob loved Tiny Tim and continues to love him. Despite their poverty and hardships, the Cratchits find strength and unity in family love." Again, the contrasts help add meaning, so let's examine the grave of Scrooge as our final act, the one the character was so unwilling to see as his own grave. Here, Dickens describes the graveyard as choked up with too much burying. Choked up personifies the graveyard, and the place becomes sick of itself, sick of its inhabitants. The graveyard's overcrowded and unkempt, mirroring the lack of care Scrooge took over his own redemption and his own moral worth, and is bereft. There are no visitors because Scrooge fostered greed, not human connections and cares in his life. This worthy place is ignored by the living, sealing the fate of Scrooge if he does not change. I hope that's useful and interesting. One way to revise this is to create a mind map of the ghost, and that way you're helping to secure it in your long-term memory. Subscribe for more, and I hope to see you back here soon.